And we are here live. I am not a cat. I'm actually Jen Hornjev from Savvy Cooperative, and we are so excited to have you here at this event today. It's going to be fun. We hope that you are excited. It's the first time that we've ever done anything like this, so we just can't wait to hear what you think. Let's kick it off and help you kind of understand what this is going to be like. First and foremost, we are going to have a series of sort of lightning talks, more like TED Talks, where we're going to bring up some fantastic speakers from patient advocacy and pharma and people that are just really working hard to make sure that the voice of patients is heard. And we're happy that you can be here to hear from them, learn from them. It's going to be very, very exciting. After that is probably the moment that you all have been waiting for, the speed dating portion of our event today. So it's going to look kind of like the first 45 minutes of our 90 minutes together today are going to be on these sort of lightning talks, learning from individuals in this space. And then we're going to open it up to that speed dating. And I'm going to come back on to kind of give you some, more guidance on how we're going to work with that. But just so you know, that's what it's going to look like for sort of how the run of show will be. So as I said, I'm Jen Hornjev, the founder and CEO of Savvy Cooperative. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Savvy, we are actually a patient-owned co-op that helps to connect companies and innovators directly with diverse patients and caregivers for the purposes of learning from their experiences. We really can't build and design new innovations and expect them to have a meaningful impact in patients' lives if we don't work with them to develop them. That's really kind of what we spend our days doing. So that's why hosting an event like this is super fun for us. For those of you who either maybe are working in patient engagement to go deeper and learn from patients. And we know there are many on the line today who are joining in for maybe the very first time to talk to a patient. And we think this is really exciting. It does not have to be a scary thing. We promise patients are people. People from pharma companies are people. We can't wait for you guys to just mix organically and have natural, fun conversations. All right, so before we get into our little talks, for those of you that are social media savvy, feel free to post about the event. You can use our hashtag, which is conveniently hashtag #AskPatients. No periods, but just hashtag #AskPatients if you want to post about it. You can find us on social media at Savvy_co-op, but feel free to just use the hashtag if you feel so inclined. All right, so we got a packed agenda, so I'm not going to delay anymore. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to somebody that I think is a really special individual and a really fabulous person to kick off this event. And why? That's because Brooke Abbott is a patient herself, and she has been in patient advocacy because of her own experiences. And she's going to bring that to the fore in our conversation now. Brooke is also a student and working diligently to continue to further the lives of patients. She's also the owner of Crazy Creole Mommy Life, and she's also the co-founder of IBD Moms. And I'm thrilled to have you here with us, Brooke, and we can't wait to learn from you. So take it away.
Good morning, everyone. It's a little bit earlier for me. I'm on the West Coast. So we're just kind of getting up and getting live here on this side of the nation. So I am super excited to talk with you guys today. Talking to patients and talking about patients is kind of my specialty just because I am a patient, but I am also a caregiver. My child doesn't necessarily live with my chronic condition, but he does live with a chronic condition. So I love working with other companies to talk to them about how to find a way to have that conversation, right? So let's just kind of jump in. I really want to talk about diversity, and diversity doesn't always mean ethnicity. It can mean sexual orientation. It can mean gender. It can mean religious beliefs. It could mean socioeconomic diversity. And I think that those having diversity on boards and in talking with people is so important, because you kind of get so many different aspects of what the United States looks like, or really the world. You have people that come into the United States from different parts of the world, bringing information about what their, health experience was in their country, and bringing that here to help us better our healthcare system is so vital. So let's talk diversity. Let's talk about how to create a diverse panel or a diverse board. Well, the first thing you need to do is, log on. There are so many different advocates on the internet right now who are completely diverse and have different stories, and there are people who are following them because they relate to those stories, and those particular advocates are sharing other people's stories because they know that someone may have found them and can relate to someone else, whether it be their family life or their religious background or their ethnicity. It's important for us as advocates to bring in different stories so that everyone feels included. But when so many voices are represented to your scientists or to your financial boards or to the public, you get a different sense of who needs what and why. And no one can speak to that more than someone who has actually experienced it. So I know for me as a legislative advocate, it's important for me to tell my story, and I try not to tell other people's story. What I try to do is I try to bring in other people. I try to bring them with me to Washington. I try to get them to write their stories down so that I can share those stories with the legislators, because my experience is great for me to tell because I can tell it, I understand it, I know it. I can answer questions to it. I can give you that full experience through my words. But because I haven't lived someone else's experience, I can't really give you that full effect. I can't speak for them. So it's so important to have that voice, but also that experience. I know for me, clinical trial diversity is so important. I think that that was compounded during this pandemic period when we were all working on getting people into clinical trials for the COVID vaccines. People of different ethnicities, different disease spaces, different socioeconomic backgrounds, they all needed to be present in those clinical trials because people, based on their finances, eat different, live different, travel different, do all, go to work differently, are more often not able to work from home. So their immunity needed to be represented in those clinical trials. So diversity, diversity, diversity. And you can't just stick with, I like to call them the 5 groups. Like, people just kind of stick to a certain group that they're comfortable with. You got to get out, you got to have those conversations. So how do you start that conversation? How do you talk to people? Well, you got to, ask questions. And sometimes it may feel uncomfortable to you, but people love those questions because they feel seen. So ask them, what their life is like, ask them about their background, ask them, what their activities are. It is kind of like dating, you're asking kind of personal, but not super personal, but kind of personal questions about their family background and what they do and why they do it. Why would you take a subway versus a car in Los Angeles? Yes, we have subways, I promise we do. And they're cool. But why would you take a subway versus a car? Why take this medication versus this other medication? Why this particular mechanism? So all of those questions are important. And as a patient, as someone who sits on advisory boards, as someone who has to speak for another patient, I promise you those questions are not invasive. They are necessary for you to get the full aspect of really who I am. And representation, I think that we have seen more so in this last year of why it's so important, why we cannot continue to speak for others, and why others need the platform to be able to speak for themselves and represent their communities and people that have their same stories. we need to feel and be active in including everyone. I'm going to say that again. We need to feel included, and we need to be active in including everyone. We cannot wait for someone else to come in and do the job that we know needs to be done. We just need to do it ourselves. So if you're thinking, yeah, we need way more diversity, or a lot of these ad boards need more diversity, well, then you should be the first to do it. You should be calling all the people and reaching out to all the advocates to get more patients and more people involved that are different than the last patient that you called. Just, there's never enough diversity. There's never enough. There's never enough. So I'm going to actually wrap it up because I feel like I could go on, and if I continue to go into the weeds, we'll be here all day. But what I hope that you take from this is know that patients are waiting for you to find them and to talk to them. And the best way to have them represent their communities is to have them speak for themselves. And they're all out there. They're on Twitter, they're on Instagram. You find one patient advocate, ask for 5 more. You find those 5, ask for 5 more. Just keep going until you have a board and a group that is so well represented, so diverse that no one feels out of place. Because truly, when you are in a diverse situation, and I speak as a woman of color, when you are in a position where it is completely diverse, you don't feel alone, and no one should ever feel alone. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Brooke, for bringing that perspective. It's obviously a much needed perspective. And, I can say what I see personally is that we are hearing like a renewed interest from, pharma companies and whomever in the past year in light of the death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. But I'm curious for you, if you have seen and felt as a patient changes in your healthcare or things that you've seen, or does it still feel like it's a bunch of people talking about it and not a lot of action?
Yes and no. I think the questions are being asked, but I also think that there are no real solutions that are being done. I feel like everyone has questions, everyone asks questions, but the answers, the real answers that people hear, it's like they hear them, but they don't know what steps to take. And so that's why I was saying, the best thing to do is just to reach out, because, you're hearing, yes, we need to diversify things. Yes, I want to diversify things. Yes, I want to, I want to be of service. I want to be of action, but I don't know what steps to take. And the first step is to reach out. That's going to be your first step.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that we see too, is just almost this analog or, these Venn diagrams of people that are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those from a patient centricity side. And there actually can be a lot of the same sort of principles of it, of if we want to be patient centered, well, let's go talk to patients. If we care about diversity and inclusion, well, we need to go talk to those types of individuals that we can help broaden our perspective. So I think if people are joining this event today, they're at least patient curious, if you will, if that's a term. And now how do we help them see that they should also make sure that within that umbrella that we're doing the work? And as you mentioned too, I think one of the things is putting aside resources. This stuff doesn't come out of thin air. And so to do the work, to make the commitment, and I'm excited that we're going to be showcasing that a little bit later as Hillary from Boehringer Ingelheim is going to come up and talk a little bit about, the work that they're doing. So thank you so much, Brooke. You are fantastic. Grateful to have you here. And we've learned so much from you already.
Thank you so much for having me and for consistently elevating the patient voice.
Oh, well, we appreciate you. And speaking of other fabulous people we appreciate, Craig Lipsit, who really needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyways because I think he's just a fabulous example of people working sort of quote unquote on the inside of truly making change in the pharma industry. So those of you who may not be familiar, Craig Lipsit is the founder of Clinical Innovation Partners. He's also the former head of clinical innovation at Pfizer, and he has now more recently started a new organization where he is the co-chair of Decentralized Trials and Research Alliance. Oh, well, hello, Craig.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just sipping coffee here.
Oh,
And
wow.
are we on now, Jen? Let me put this down and get it out of the way.
I didn't even know that would be there. But by the way, that was the hashtag. So if you feel like posting, hashtag ask patients. All right. Well, Craig, I'm going to turn it to you. But, just so grateful for somebody who has been so focused on decentralized clinical trials for so long. It's now sort of become hip. But, I know that you're coming at it from a genuine place of knowing what patients already knew, that we wanted decentralized trials for so long. But of course, it took a pandemic for that to happen. And I know you've been doing so much work in this space. So I am going to clear the floor, give you the stage, and let everybody else learn what I already know are fabulous things from you.
Well, thanks for setting such a realistic bar and expectation for me, and now to have to go after Brooke too. This is going to be rough. Well, it's great to be here with everybody, and I'm really excited about this whole matchmaking format. This is really going to be a fun afternoon to get together. As Jen mentioned, I'm a clinical trial guy. I've been working inside of pharma for years. I'm also a patient. I'm the vice president at the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, so not only a board member there, but a patient there myself. But what I'm looking forward to chatting with you about is a little bit of what's going on inside the mind of a pharma clinical trial study team or a study leader right now, because the short answer is they want to listen to you. They're still just trying to figure out the how. So let me back up for a moment. Some of the big trends that are going on right now as it relates to clinical trials include how do we consistently get patient input into our study designs? How do we improve the experience for research participants and give them the right tools to be able to participate easier and give them the right information that they need? And how do we improve access for people that want to participate in research? But it's hard. And today we know it's burdensome, but how can we make it more accessible, either by offering travel support or, as Jen mentioned, the thing that happened so much during the pandemic, how do we shift the location and let people do more from home without having to travel a great distance just to have a visit in a study? But so much of this begins all the way at the beginning when people are planning and designing their studies, and the question comes up of, wherefore art thou patient? How do I include patient input into the work that I'm doing? So once upon a time, this question was really, I won't say it was uncommon, but it was isolated. People in rare disease research, people in certain oncology indications, they really led the way in terms of working together with patients to include that voice in study designs. But what was once really incremental has now become more and more mainstream. It's kind of enterprise for these companies today. When I was at Pfizer, I watched it happen firsthand with my team as we moved patient insights from just a nice to have to being an expectation, from being something that just happened incrementally to something that every study team would be challenged. What input did you get from patients, and how did it affect the design of your study? But for a pharma company to make that happen, they really have to navigate a lot of internal policies and processes to figure that out in their organization. In the early days, a lot of people inside of study teams thought that they'd go do something in violation of a policy, that they're not allowed to talk to patients like this, that it's inappropriate, or it somehow violates a rule, or the other myth that there's some law or regulation that, if I talk to patients, I'm going to go to patient jail. But clearly that's not the case, because the jails have not been filled up with well-intentioned researchers, but in fact, this is happening more and more. I think one of the other big questions that most pharma teams have had to navigate is, do we pay people for their input? And if we do, how do we figure out fair market value for that so that we know we're paying people the right amount, that we're not being disrespectful and underpaying, but that we're not looking like we're inducing and doing something that's nefarious by overpaying. So I think that there's a lot of that people have been navigating, and there's some great guidance that other groups like the National Health Council have created to help show companies how to do this. So what are the big questions that remain? Because it's not really a question anymore of if we're going to be able to talk and listen to patients, but how. The questions used to be ones I used to get like, what do you want me to tell a patient? Or what if they ask me for things I can't do? But that's not really what's front and center on people's minds today. What's front and center today is, first off, predictability. They want to know that they can get patient input in a timely way and that it can fit within their budgets. And I know fitting within their budget sounds silly because you think big pharma companies have unlimited financial resources, but remember, we're not talking about the chief financial officer for Merck here. We're talking about an individual study team, and they do have a budget and a timeline they have to navigate. But I think equally important, and this builds on that last fabulous talk, is how do I find patient voices that are truly representative of the patients that I'm looking to engage for my study? Representative in terms of geography, age, gender, race, ethnicity, geography just within the US, geography on a global basis. Because right now it's kind of a wild west for these different study teams. Some are running out to advocacy groups, some are going to online communities, some are looking for patients off the street, and more of them are finding platforms like Savvy that can help them to connect with patients. But how do we start to make that process a little easier and a little more rational for those different teams so that they can get the diverse insight they need in a timely way? Now, when that happens, good things happen, right? For study teams, hopefully it means they're going to avoid an amendment to their study, something that they all want to avoid, because an amendment means I wrote something in my protocol that just doesn't work, and now I have to redo things and go back in time and lose time by rewriting things and resubmitting for different types of approvals. So to them, that's one of the great accomplishments, certainly, is to have a study that they can go live with much greater confidence that it's really going to work. And when they're introducing different tools, that the ones that are touching and facing the patients are ones that can actually work for the patients who are participating. And so that's kind of what I'll throw out to this group here today in terms of what's kind of buzzing right now in the mindset of the pharma team and the study teams that are out there. And I'm really looking forward to hearing with you. What are some of the questions on people's minds as we all start to network and mingle together here? And it looks like my friend Jen is coming back on right now.
I'm back. Well, thank you as always. And I can see from the comments, both professionals and patients alike are saying, yes, Craig, thank you for calling out, again, what patients have been championing so long. And we need people like you on the inside, making the change, putting the pressure there. And so to that end, I'm curious too, if you have any sort of, I don't want to say predictions, because I feel like that's a way to get out of having to put anything concrete, but like, what do you think that we'll see this year based on things like a move to decentralized trials? Do you see from or hear from your industry colleagues that there is sort of this desire to make sure that they're doing it right with patients, or is it just bulldozing ahead?
Well, during 2020, there were a lot of bulldozers, right? So in 2020, back in that March, April, May timeframe, studies started to really run into jeopardy in terms of being able to keep patients on study drug, continue to monitor them for efficacy and safety, and have confidence that we're doing right by the people who are relying on those investigational medicines. And so it was a bit of a bulldozer in terms of what do we need to grab? What are the countermeasures and tools that we have to get going in these studies to make sure that people can still participate without going into a clinic? Now, by the end of last year, dust started to settle a bit. The studies that were going to be saved were saved, and people were able to stay on, and new studies started to come back online. But now what we're starting to see is kind of this stabilizing when people are pausing and making sure that the things we're doing actually are right and needed by the participants and the patients for our trials. And I'll give an example, Jen. This shift in location of the home, in and of itself sounds nice, but that's not necessarily what everybody wants. And so as we stop and we talk and we listen with patients, we hear more and more that the theme isn't make me go to the clinic or make me stay home. It's about giving me choice and optionality in how I participate. My journey changes, my needs change, wherever I am. And to have choice in how I participate is probably the right signal that we're getting from patients. And it's telling the people on the industry side, you still have work to do, because making that happen is pretty hard.
Yes. And I, again, feel so much more comforted that I know that you are doing so much, and especially with your initiative for around decentralized trials. And I hope for folks who are not yet familiar with the great work that Craig is doing now, go and check it out and join him for DTRA, Decentralized Trials and Research Alliance. Please go check it out. And hopefully you can learn a thing or two, even more than the 8 minutes we had here today.
Well, I'm going to sit back and enjoy my coffee here and look forward to the next speaker and then to networking with everybody.
Fantastic. Thank you, Craig. And speaking of next speaker, you get to hear more from me. And this is just a kind of level set. I feel like if anybody has now been sucked into the Clubhouse vortex, I should say, let's reset the room, if you will. So for those that have perhaps joined a little bit later, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Jen Horonjeff, the founder and CEO of Savvy Cooperative. And I actually think it might be a little bit helpful for you to understand my sort of patient journey and why we do what we do. And then I'm going to tell you, kind of building off of what the two previous speakers had talked about how do we do this kind of work? Because I know that many of you may now be like, yes, let's do it, but have some practical questions. So I am a patient. I was diagnosed with juvenile idiopathic arthritis when I was just an infant. I walked early, and so my parents apparently saw me limping, and I was like, maybe 9 months old or so. I was officially diagnosed when I was 11 months old. And so the question then was, what was my life going to be like? And it has shaped my entire life as a patient. I have a whole laundry list of other autoimmune conditions. I usually use just sort of the umbrella term because it's hard to know when one stops and one begins. Some rare, some more common. It is, what's the date? Today is the 11th. So I am 9 days away from my 8-year brain tumor removal anniversary. So 8 years out of that. Of course, I have not gone and gotten a follow-up scan in the past year because that has been a scary thing to do during a pandemic, but hopefully there's nothing else up there except smarts and ideas. And it was this patient lens that is what led me to think about how can we make a change in healthcare? Because honestly, I'll tell you, I was pre-med to begin with, but I was a bit disenchanted by the healthcare system because I saw what limitations there were for my own clinicians because of insurance or other, regulations that prevented the ability to kind of practice the care that they wanted to. So that's what brought me into the healthcare ecosystem as a human factors engineer and a human-centered designer. And I was an academic studying patient-centered outcomes in clinical trials and things like this, and saw what Craig was just describing, that people wanted to make better things for patients. They just didn't have all that information. They needed to connect with what Brooke was talking about, with those diverse individuals. And we need to understand sort of like having a menu of options. So there's a time and place for different types of individuals and how many different individuals you might be looking for. So many of you may already be partnering with patient advocacy organizations, and that's a great way to sort of develop that relationship and figure out, what maybe if you're in a pharma space, like what does a launch strategy look like? How do you make sure that you are connecting and providing resources to those groups that need it, from education and policy? But the truth is that advocacy organizations don't solve all the problems. We need to also talk to people that are not activated or engaged at all. And that's where, patient advocates, individuals like myself, like my co-founder, Ronnie, who has cystic fibrosis and is also sort of a high-level advocate before starting Savvy, we found that we were the ones that were very, very frequently tapped. And it was very uncomfortable at a certain point to then be the sort of patient voice for all those different people. There are 54 million Americans with arthritis. One person cannot speak for all of them. And that's what Brooke was telling us too, right? Like, even from kind of a background where she was aware that she needed to be able to say, hey, let's make sure that you're going to go out and talk to more individuals. We need everybody from the industry to also recognize this, especially if we care about diversity and equity and inclusion. And this isn't necessarily easy, right? We need to connect with those individuals, and certainly happy to talk about that. But really, I want to share in my final minutes with you some of the best practices for how to do that. That depending on where you are in sort of your journey, sort of developing a product or service, there may be the ability to go out and get a larger sample, but big data does not solve all problems. It is a signal that maybe something's wrong, right? But like if you see some sort of signal in either wearable data or you did a massive survey, how do you know how to fix it? And that's why we need to go talk to those patients to understand what happened, what can be improved. So that's why there's this beautiful marriage between sort of the big data and sort of this richer qualitative data, which you can be getting through things like surveys, if they're more qualitative focused, interviews, focus groups, patient roundtables. We do a lot around user experience testing to make sure that people understand certain concepts or they can use things. It might be prototype testing. They might actually be downloading an app and testing it out for different bugs. It might be things like hosting workshops and doing co-design and journey mapping and all of these kind of things. So it's really exciting that there's a whole sort of menu of ways that you can go and get those patient insights, and it's not one and done. So that's where I feel there's a lot of people that get sort of nervous that, oh gosh, am I going to plan the perfect patient engagement project? But that's sort of the wrong way to look at it. We want to make sure that we're thinking about, I'm going to do this now, then I'm going to just keep going over and over and over again. It has to be iterative. And I think that the tech industry understands that. So it's been great as they've kind of come into the space to shake things up, be it through digital therapeutics. We've loved working on lots of those projects, but we're seeing that now in the pharma industry too. So it's really great to kind of bring that sort of like quick, lean startup model into clinical innovations. And one thing I want to leave you with before we move on, and I'm excited for our next speaker, but is how do we do this equitably? And I'm going to say something that's going to scare some of you, but it is that we have to think about how we are fairly compensating patients for their time and expertise. Otherwise, we are only furthering this divide and creating more innovations that are not inclusive, but are just designed for a subset of the population whose voices you heard because perhaps they had more privilege to be able to be in a position to do things for free. That's what both Ronnie and I experienced that as patient advocates. We kind of already had a seat at the table. We were consultants. We could, be a little bit more flexible with things. And that is not how everybody's schedule and finances work. And it is not about coercing patients to give them the insight or have them give you the insights that they want. No, it's saying thank you for your time and having to go out and get a babysitter to participate in this. So we really have to think about equitably valuing patients from a diversity, equity, inclusion lens as well, if we actually meaningfully want to do the work. And that is why I am so excited to bring up our next speaker, Hillary Wilson, who is the Director of Patient Affairs and Engagement at Boehringer Ingelheim. Hillary, come on up. And Hillary's going to tell a little bit about a project that we partnered on between Savvy and BI. And I just am so proud of the work and the commitment that BI has made to not just talking about these things, but doing the work. And it's not a one and done. I'm so thrilled to see kind of where this is going to go and how they're going to continue sort of championing the patient voice within their clinical innovation and commercialization. So Hillary, thank you so much for joining us. Can't wait to hear what you have to share with our audience.
All right. Thanks, Jen. I had to follow the cat and Brooke and Craig and now you. So, I have a tough task ahead. But, one of the things that I do at BI is to help connect teams internally with patients. So finding ways to bring in the patient voice so that it can inform many different aspects of our work. And I think Brooke said it really well. The events of last year really demanded that we all think differently about diversity, inclusion, and health equity. And last summer, I had the chance to start to talk with many different individuals across our US organization about different health equity initiatives that they were leading, either internally in the organization, some of them externally. And, I recognized I was first of all, really inspired by the passion that all these individuals brought to their work. But, I also kind of had this nagging feeling like, guys, we all work at Pharma. we probably should pause and take a minute. And, we're talking about health equity, we're working on this, but we should listen, directly to patients that are Black, African American, Hispanic, Latinx, and or Native American, and get their perspectives on the healthcare industry. Have they participated in clinical trials? And if they had, what's their experience? If not, why not? My favorite, part was really more about re-envisioning pharma. It's year 2030, and we really have adequate representation of all racial and ethnic patients in our clinical trials. What did the pharma industry do to get there? So the teams were excited about this. We really wanted to do it. We reached out to Savvy. Jen met with the team and helped us think about, what were the kinds of questions that we wanted to ask, and how did we actually want to use these insights internally across the organization. And she helped us design this two-phased Savvy patient engagement project. In the first phase, it was a 7-day asynchronous live workshop that was conducted over the Savvy platform. And so Ronnie, very quickly identified 20 individuals that were Black, African American, Hispanic, Latinx, and or Native American to participate in this live workshop. And then Jen helped us kind of structure the questions, and then questions were asked really over that 7-day period. So, a handful of questions on the first day or two, and then more questions would open up, and they had 2 or 3 days to answer those. And one of the things I really liked about the way this project was set up is that all of the workshop participants could see each other's responses to the questions. And so they could build off of one another, and see the story, react to that, and then, build and share more experiences beyond that. Jen moderated the discussion, and she was able to probe on, some of the themes that we saw at BI that, we were really interested in learning more. And at the end of that 7 days, Jen did a qualitative analysis to pull out the key themes that were identified. And these were very clearly actionable, across the BI organization. And the project didn't stop there. So the second phase of the project was designed really to bring those stories to life across our US medical organization. So in mid-December, we invited 5 of those 20 to participate in a live patient engagement panel event. Jen moderated the discussion and, worked to bring out those themes that were identified in that workshop. But importantly, make these, statistics that we read about, every day real, and hear the real experiences about, how, some of these individuals had been treated in healthcare, why some hadn't participated in clinical trials, and what they really felt needed to happen in order to build trust, increase transparency, and increase diversity and representation, not only in clinical trials, but also in our patient engagement activities. I think that, now we're at a stage where I can truly say that the insights that were shared from that patient engagement activity have been pulled back into our organization, and are driving, changes and decisions in several of the different health equity initiatives that are being designed. But what we're working with now, Savvy, is to try to set up a project where we can make this two-way communication. Not surprisingly to probably anybody on this call, one of the themes that we heard is we need transparency and we need a two-way dialogue. And so we felt it was important to actually be able to go back and say, we heard you, we listened, this is what we're doing. So this year, what we hope to do is have a diversity and inclusion patient council where we have workshops set up for BI, to report back to the patients, and then also have ways to gather additional insights on some of the key themes that are more project specific. Decentralized trials is one of those that we're really interested in at BI, and hearing more from this diversity and inclusion patient council. I think from a patient engagement methodological perspective, to me, what stood out about this project is, we were able to get insights really quickly. I mean, maybe it was, 6 weeks kind of from project inception until we were having the workshop. So being able to get these insights fast. I loved that it could also be in written form. Some individuals don't really want to talk, in a focus group or even an interview, not necessarily as a patient speaker. One of the individuals that we invited to participate in the panel discussion at first was a little bit hesitant because she said, "Oh, I'm really a writer. I like to write and share my thoughts on paper or on the computer, but I don't really like to speak." She did ultimately end up deciding to join the panel, and I was really glad because she was just so courageous, and her story really impacted many of the individuals that dialed in to hear that call. Those are just a couple of the things that I really liked about it. I also love that it's got our organization thinking more about this two-way interaction and how we can be innovative in the ways that we do engage with patients, and continue to evolve how we approach patient centricity as well as diversity and inclusion at BI. All right, with that, Jen, I guess I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm going to ask you a question before you disappear. I think one of the things that we found to be phenomenal with the project was the fact that you really wanted to make sure that others in your organization heard, because I think that that's what happens too often is one team does the project and then, it's a whole huge organization and they never are able to sort of learn from that. So I'm curious too, if you're able to share kind of what sort of turnout and what sort of feedback you heard about actually doing that aspect of the project, which I know is something that you were really championing to make sure the organization heard. What was the response like to that?
Yeah, I was shocked. It was a mid-December panel, so everybody's got a lot on their mind that time of year, and we had over 400 people dial into that live event. And I've done a number of patient engagement, activities at BI, and I've never had that amount of response. I think that shows how important this is to our employees at our company, which just reinvigorates our leadership's commitment to this. We heard amazing feedback after the event. I can say that there were many calls and conversations that came following that event. These stories were raw. It was not easy to hear. I know, Jen, that you were there. You heard these stories, you read these stories, and it's very, very difficult. But these are the stories that we need to hear to really understand the challenges. So it was very, very well received, and I think that it kind of is similar. There's a lot of parallels with how we've had to evolve into a patient-centric industry, right? In order for an organization to really truly be patient-centric, they need to embody that culturally. It needs to be part of the DNA of the company. And I think that that's exactly what we're trying to do with diversity and inclusion. The way that you change that culture is you bring those stories so that no matter where you sit in the organization and no matter what your day-to-day job is, that you can identify and hear those stories.
Oh, well, we so appreciate you and the work that you're doing and look forward to continuing to advance your mission with you. As I know that you're going to go back and have a lot of great ways to continue to kind of challenge your organization to make those changes. So thank you so much, Hillary. Thank you for sharing that with our audience. I know that everyone loves a good case story study, so thank you for that.
All right, let's speed date.
Let's do it. All right. So a couple ground rules before we do the fun stuff. Just to kind of set the stage, I'm going to kind of teach you how this works a little bit. Before I show you where to go, I'm going to talk to you first so you don't jump away. All right. I believe that you should have received the sort of ground rules that we sent as an attachment for those of you participating in the seed dating. If not, Ronnie is going to drop a link into the chat right now to also, you can pull that up sort of just so you have that as a refresher. I'm going to review some of the ground rules with you. So first of all, this is meant to be a fun, casual conversation. Don't be afraid to have a fun, organic, time, but patience, certainly if there's anything you don't want to talk about, just say that and move on. we want to make sure for both sides that we are not going to ask about a specific product or service or drug. We're not here to solve any of those problems. Also, patients, we don't want you to talk about any of your specific drugs or side effects. That gets mucky. So we're just not going to talk about those kind of things, really just high level ideas about kind of what that patient experience is like. Also, when it comes to sort of how these time chunks work, they're going to be sort of, you're going to go in a second to the networking section. You will have a minimum time of 3 minutes with your match, your date. After 3 minutes, you're able to say if you want to leave, but we encourage you to stay the whole time as long as you're, having a good conversation. And that whole time is 10 minutes. Now, there is the ability to extend your time, but we don't want you to do that because that will throw off everybody else's matchmaking. So please don't do that. And finally, also, we do not want you to be exchanging contact information. That comes a sort of compliance sticky wicket. So we're going to just stay away from that. If anybody does want to reconnect with your match, please reach out to us at Savvy, and we would be happy to make that sort of connection. But we want to just make sure that this is a nice, safe, compliant standpoint. All right, I made you some analog screenshots so you can see what this is like. Okay, over here in a second, you're going to see this little thing. You're in the stage. In a second, you're going to click on that networking, but not until I show you these next screens. Look, that's me all blurred out so that you can't see me. The next thing, once you're in there, it's going to say, you're going to see a little spinny wheel that says, you'll meet the next person available. And you just wait, be patient, folks. And then you'll see this screen. Now, this is what matchmaking is going to look like. These are the 2 buttons we don't want you to press because that's going to extend your time and share your contact information. So it's going to be really tempting because they're buttons and people love to push buttons, but don't push those buttons. Lastly, when you're ready to leave, you can press leave. You'll also notice there's a little countdown clock that happens at the beginning. That's going to show you how much of that 10 minutes you have left. So then you can press leave at the end, and then you're going to go back to that little swirly screen, and it's going to have you get to your next match. And that is it. And we want you to come back to the stage afterwards so we can give some sort of closing shout outs as well. But with that, over to that little networking tab that's either right here or right here. I don't know if I'm backwards or not. So have at it and have fun. Yay!